We're going to have a little different setup than my last session. We're going to let each of Abby and Jonathan introduce themselves and just give us a little why that you're working in this long-term climate resilience space. And then each of them have a presentation to share of a specific case study that they want to discuss. And then we'll have a broader, that's my phone, Jen. And then we'll have a conversation after that. So with that, I think I'll hand it to Abby to introduce yourself and the why and what's inspiring you right now, high level.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Abby Ross. I'm the CEO of the Resiliency Company. I come to this work after working in schools for about a decade, tackling critical thinking in K-12 education system. And then I became the CEO of an organization called Network for Good. If you're in the nonprofit space, you might have received checks from us. We are a donor advised fund that works with organizations like Walmart, Patagonia, and YouTube to help unleash generosity. We've sent about $5 billion to nearly half of the charities across the country. And when I came in as CEO, I noticed this big surge in our fund around times of disaster. So we had sent, millions of dollars to communities after fires, hurricanes, severe storms, and that really sent down a strategic discovery path where I recognized two things. One is that we have a lot more disasters headed our way. And two, the way in which money flows into communities after a disaster is not durable. It's not set up for long term recovery. A lot of philanthropic capital gets donated immediately. It goes to really important relief effort, but a lot of times it leaves communities years after owning their own recovery, which is important, but the capital is not persistent. So we created the Resiliency Company ultimately to help communities recover with resilience because the world of risk is increasing, and so that we could also get in front of how to build communities with resilience to protect from future disasters and risk.
Thanks, Abby. Jonathan?
Hi, my name's Jonathan Parfrey. I'm the executive director slash CEO of an organization called Climate Resolve. That's not my photo, by the way. I just want you to disclaimer.
We can't find the clicker.
Uh,
Or
all right.
we were warned.
Oh, moving
There we
back to the other
It's good.
photo.
I
That's
think the
just
other
much
people are
better.
probably better at clicking.
I founded this organization about 16 years ago. I was a commissioner at the fabled Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. You may have seen the documentary film called Chinatown about the LADWP. And I claim some responsibility of making it a little bit better, incrementally better. And then I had the pleasure of, while I was at Climate Resolve, of helping to pass SB 246 with Nature Conservancy and via the good work of Senator Bob Wykowski. Some of you may recall Bob. I know Sam Liu knows Bob. And we started something called the ICARP program in the governor's office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, formerly known as OPR. And it's sort of established the framework on resilience in the state of California. So I'm really proud of that work. And we continue to work with the governor's office of land use and climate innovation to this day. But what makes me happy is actually being here. I love it when I get to go into a room where I know just a handful of people and there's a bunch of folks I don't know. And I'm just so deeply moved and impressed by the folks that have gone through these very difficult situations, some of the experts that are in this room, and especially the great work of After the Fire. So you're part of a great organization, Lisa. So can we give After the Fire a little round of applause, please? So I was appointed by the LA County Supervisor, Lindsay Horvath, to serve on the LA County Blue Ribbon Commission on the Wildfire Recovery. It has another fancy name, but that essentially is it. And it was really diverse, great folks from all over the state. And we had 3 different reports that came out. One was an immediate one after we met for 5 days, another one was a 30-day report, and the 90-day, we had a big press conference on June 20th. We talked to a bunch of folks, and frankly, we could have kept going. We were all very busy people. We probably put in a few hundred hours each into the process to try to come up with good recommendations for policy to go forward. And so you can see the list of different work groups. I won't repeat the words that are on there. Um, and there were two big takeaways. One was forming an authority, a rebuilding authority. And what do we mean by this? And I think this is a really important thing. After virtually every disaster, every earthquake, there is a way that government comes together to get stuff done. That's the authority. It was just to empower members of the community to serve on this authority that can then move state and local financial resources to get the recovery in place. Unfortunately, what happened in Los Angeles is that it got very politicized by folks at the city, quite candidly. And so, what we wanted to do, our recommendation was to start that rebuilding process as quickly as possible. We were also looking at a fire control district, kind of akin to what Marin has. So for the folks that are from Northern California, you get a sense that we wanted to have some funding available for people to knock on doors and to help people prepare. So there's also some big federal headwinds. You guys understand this right now. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and be a little bit political because the politics haven't gelled well in Los Angeles. And that is a problem. And that's why we were pushing for an authority. We want to see the local groups. You heard from Lori Gay earlier. There are many people here from Altadena. There are many people here from Palisades. We wanted to give them the ability to work on the recovery and for it to be funded. Um, Unfortunately, who's going to do that? Do we see these efforts actually manifesting within government right now? Unfortunately, the answer is no. There's a real lack of leadership. And I wish I could say otherwise. And we have to look out into the future. We There are communities in Los Angeles, you know their names: Bel Air, Beverly Hills, Brentwood, Sunland, Tahunga. These communities are in the WUI, and yet they don't think they have a bullseye on their back. They don't. And so we need to help them get prepared. And this is also the mission of the Blue Ribbon Commission. So those are my slides very briefly, but I wanted to bring you up to speed on what this group of subject matter experts pulled together as a way of bringing new policy to bear to help with the recovery.
I'm coming at this from a different lens, which is, ultimately recognizing that after a disaster, when you're thinking about rebuilding, there's a lot of barriers that stand in the way. And as the Resiliency Company, we're coming in with the perspective of how can we help empower those that decide to rebuild to make sure that they rebuild to a resilient and insurable standard. So, the North Star vision of our work is after a fire, we can rebuild homes to be safe and insurable. Because, as we know, wildfire risk is more frequent, it's also more widespread. So, when we think about after a fire, this is something that is going to be happening all over the country. So, we need to make resilient rebuilding the norm, the default. So, to properly prepare for our future of increasing wildfire risk, we have the technology and solutions to prepare homes from wildfire, the IBHS standard. After the fires in Los Angeles, we, through the connections with After the Fire, did several homeowner interviews on the rebuilding challenges. We recognize the rebuilding journey is overwhelming. There's a crisis of trust. Financial gaps are widespread. Resilience is desired but feels inaccessible. And hope remains alongside frustration. Nothing really new today. These is a lot to tackle. And so ultimately, our work with the Resiliency Company is thinking about how can we help with the financial gaps and to make this idea of resilience that is desired but feels inaccessible more attainable. So, one of the things that we did was bring together a very diverse group of stakeholders, including the kind of lens was if you are thinking about or involved in the effort of deciding what gets rebuilt, come talk to us about what the next 1, 3, 6, 10 years is going to look like. That included bringing insurance to the table, financial institutions, community groups, and builders and architects to get in one room to talk about a vision for what a resilient rebuild will look like. Because it used to be that when a fire happened, we could rebuild what was there before, and we can no longer do that anymore. So all of these systems need to change. And what we know is that insurers cover rebuilding to current code, and codes aren't good enough, nor are they adopted with consistency. So there's a delta. We know that there is a gap to rebuild a home, and there's what we call the resiliency delta. It's the extra cost required to build to a wildfire prepared plus standard. It costs more today. If we do our jobs right, it won't cost more forever. It'll just be the way that we build homes. But today we recognize that this is one of the key barriers facing homeowners is if they want to rebuild with resilience, it costs more. So that's ultimately what the Resilient Delta Fund is a platform that provides grants and loans to rebuild the 12,000 homes to a insurable fire resilient standard. So that's a little bit about how we're thinking about operationalizing the capital and the process to help homeowners build with a resilient standard. That's all I got.
That's great. Thank you both so much for your leadership. I mean, I'm really struck. Something that's so hard to describe to people about wildfire is this kind of hyper local reality. And I remember that feeling that way when we had our fires. I called it being like inside the smoke bubble versus outside the smoke bubble. So I guess my first question is, and I felt that in Los Angeles too, where when you're in the neighborhoods that have been impacted, it's easy to just sort of not know that those areas are there. So what are your guys' thoughts about how people can start to feel in a large community like this that like people are really all in this together? I mean, we're going to talk about leadership, but the constituency, like, is there the potential for the constituency to feel like one body or united? Or do you think there's always going to be this variability in people's reality check on their risk? And I'm sort of reacting, Jonathan, to your comment about neighborhoods not realizing they're also under risk, even though it just happened next door to them.
Yeah, I think we have a optimism bias, perhaps, that we don't think that our number is coming up. It's this photograph is kind of giving me a pause because I keep it on there. I like it. No, but that's
That's
be-
the one.
because where I raised my children is a home right above there in the Marquez Knolls community of the Pacific Palisades. And that home burned down. We had moved out, but my children are quite struck by it that their childhood home is no more.
Mm.
Um, and that community it's a mobile home community. It's deemed not residential but commercial, and so it hasn't been cleaned up by the Army Corps or their contractors, and it's sitting there still in a very devastated state. So if you ever travel up PCH, you'll see it. One of the mobile home parks did get cleared, but the other two in Palisades, if not, um, that sense of connection, belonging, I think after the fire is demonstrating that to have that kind of honesty that we were hearing earlier today from our friend from Paradise. But I've heard it throughout the day where you're not gilding the lily, you're not trying to make things sound better than they are. I think that that sort of it's not only therapeutic in the moment, but it provides a chance for other people to come in. And that's what I heard here today. And I think that's very profound that we shouldn't bullshit our way out of these things. We have to be real with each other. And I think that is the bond and the glue of a real community. Um, However, I wasn't planning to talk about that.
I know I popped the surprise question on you.
I was going to talk about resilience hubs because my organization has actually done resilience hubs. Everyone talks about it as the panacea, as the answer to things. And my unfortunate report on that is that it's a great idea, almost, it's a great solution looking for the problem. The Marissa Aho, who was the LA City's chief resilience officer, who then went to Houston and dealt with the floods there and has now been up in King County, Washington. She served also on the Blue Ribbon Commission, one of the most knowledgeable people on resilience in the United States. And she asked a very pointed question about resilience hubs. And
And
it's
could you define a resilience hub? Like, what's a resilience hub to you?
I'll tell you the definition by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network that invented the concept of the resilience hub. It's so that it is a entity that is supported by a local jurisdiction, but it is operated by a nonprofit that is beloved of the surrounding community. It's a place that the surrounding community would already go to. It's a place that high school kids go after school or that community members are used to going. So there's a familiarity and an openness and a relationship already. However, their funding would come from a civic institution. And it would also be a microgrid so that if all electricity fails, it can still operate. That's the USDN definition. Um, what we found is that most nonprofits don't own their building and they're renting. And so, if there's a physical upgrade of putting solar and backup batteries on a building, you're providing a capital benefit to a private landlord without it actually, uh, there's nothing stipulated that there has to be that continuing relationship with the nonprofit or with the community at large. And sometimes I don't feel good about using public funds for the private benefit of an owner. We ran into that in Boyle Heights in East LA, and it turned into a problem. What we kind of made lemonade out of the situation because the nonprofit also ran a radio station, and so we were able to give them backup power to operate the radio station uh, forever. They could do that, and it would be a benefit to that community, and then further help them with the students to develop PSAs on a variety of different resilience issues and threats. And the group in Boyle Heights has also, with some help from our organization, been able to do fundraising to bring in additional resources to aid in their resilience work. The programmatic work that they've been able to do in Boyle Heights is fantastic. It's just been great. We just ran into that issue with a private landlord, and we thought we had a negotiated agreement, and then that private person backed out. And so, because of that, I'm very skeptical of the model, the USDN model, because I don't know about that longevity. They like the idea of a private nonprofit running it so that people would have that sense of safety coming into a resilience hub, and they wouldn't have it if, let's say, if it was at a sheriff's substation or if it was at a
Well,
library or
well,
something
what about
like
a
that.
philanthropic investment in getting the nonprofit to own their own facility? Could that
That would be good, but I think you're talking about less than 1% of all nonprofits that could pull that off, yeah.
yeah. Abby, how about you? How do you create connectivity in the between the stakeholders and the constituents in the community that's dealing with the resilience challenge?
Yeah, great question. So, I am acknowledged I am an outsider. I do not have survivor experience, and what I have really been honored and inspired to watch is how much the community does recognize gaps and fills it with, homegrown solutions. The block captain, the post fires of the world are seeing things and fixing things that, I think about kind of at a macro level and recognize. And so what um have been fortunate enough to then try to help is think about some of the industries that are making it challenging to recover and recover with resilience. I was at the Marsh McLennan Risk and Resilience Symposium. So talking with insurers and carriers who, kind of there was a moment of the conference where somebody said, if State Farm spent as much time fighting me on my claims as they did investing in my resilience, we wouldn't have this problem." And so there's this consistent drumbeat that, you know, I would like to help as the resiliency company really be that steady drumbeat of how can we help other industries and sectors who we depend on to recover be present at the table and be solution oriented instead of business as usual, because this requires doing things a new way, building homes differently, getting materials in a different way, insuring things differently, using different underwriting standards. Like, these are all things that sound are going to be really challenging, but kind of have to be pulled together.
Right. We're pointing to the big question that we were pondering, which is, how can we grow and maintain the leadership critical to an effective rebuild effort, especially when leadership interest or political imperative could be at risk of waning post disaster? And I think we're also hearing about different kinds of leadership. I'm hearing from you, Jonathan, like the need for the electeds and, the city to take action in Los Angeles. So can we hear a little bit more about your thoughts about how to grow and what does the ideal leadership structure or the leader look like who's going to step into this gap right now?
Well, in the state of California, if voters have an initiative to have a revenue measure, and it depends on the kind of measure, there are a number of things related to this, but you can circulate a petition, get enough signatures, and if you put that measure on the ballot, you only need 50% plus one for that measure to go into effect. However, if, let's say, a board of supervisors or a city council put forward a revenue measure, they would need, by law, 66.6%. And so if you think about your own community, your own constituents, I bet many of you thinks, well, I think we can get to 50%, but could you get to two-thirds? I think that's a much heavier, especially in these dire times right now. So I think the answer is, in effect, to have some form of voter initiatives that's informed by polling so that you strike the right message, that you have enough elements in the design of that revenue measure so that you have outside support for those campaigns from either construction companies or from health institutions or from insurance companies. It depends that you need to be able to finance the campaign so that you can get this across the finish line. In other words, don't wait for the politicians. You can be informed by their concerns. In fact, we've sought our guidance from our attorneys to give us the guidelines where we can listen to the county council, we can listen to the supervisors' offices as to what they would like to see in a resilience revenue measure. However, at the end of the day, it has to be a voter driven initiative to qualify for that 50%. If there's too much collusive activity between the governing bodies and the local group that is putting the revenue measure on the ballot, I could see challenges, legal challenges to that. But I think there is case law that says it can be done. And I think rather than waiting for the politicians to do the right thing, just we should do the right thing. And what we need more than anything else when it comes to resilience, you guys know, we need capital money, sure. Yeah, great. Boy, do we need O&M. We need the ongoing regular funding so that people can be deployed into the field, so that we can knock on doors, so that there are people staffing the agencies that know what they're doing and that could help in a recovery process, a rebuilding process, or a mitigation process to prevent the next disaster.
And just to clarify, O&M is operations and maintenance?
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. How about you, Abby? How would you respond to that?
So, I agree with everything Jonathan said, and I think there's a through line there, which is investing in ongoing capacity building and ongoing infrastructure that is there for the long haul, because this is a long road ahead. And so that means multi-year funding, that means non-restrictive, that means letting the folks do the work, continue to do the work, and not have to keep going back to a cycle of fundraising. So whether that's, call to philanthropic capital, or the folks doing work finding opportunities for sustainable revenue, there needs to be a feedback cycle for, how this work can continue. I think for leadership to happen. And that means a lot of times these great ideas that have popped up need the durability to continue the work to see it through. Because it's not coming elsewhere.
So one of the things we were chatting about was the value of a centralized authority. So I'm hearing different models. Some of this is distributed, right? Like different sectors have to collaborate and come together. We focus a lot on collaboration. But where do you see the role of a centralized authority or some centralized jurisdiction being critical to achieving these goals?
So there has to be a relationship with the state of California. So, for example, if let's pick a county, so Lake County, if Lake County wanted to go above the 2% of local taxes that it's allotted, it needs permission from the California legislature to do so. And so someone, let's say Senator Ben Allen, could propose a Lake County Resilience District that put a half-cent sales tax before that is possible to be funded. And then there could be a private initiative to put a quarter cent sales tax there. And then there would be ongoing funding that would go into a resilience district, which in turn could be spent on doing the resilience work. It would be ongoing funding. But we need to message it correctly, because I don't think the electorate right now is really trusting government too much. And so what we do need is to have structures in place so that people feel confident that if they're being taxed this extra money, it'll be put to good use by good people doing the right thing. And I think that's all possible. I know we're in a very cynical time right now, but I think that at the local level, where there are relationships, we can perhaps make that work. For example, in Los Angeles, if we had a quarter cent sales tax increase, it would yield somewhere around $600 million a year. That's not chicken feed. That could really do a lot of work, not just on wildfire preparedness, but even more than that, having to do with extreme heat from climate change, having to do with seismic issues, having to do with we get floods. And I can tell you right now, LA County Public Works, they could use all that money right now to just do debris removal in its basins, debris basins. So there are ways in which, if we act in a concerted way with support from philanthropy to help us do the right kind of polling, help us do the right kind of messaging, and then they can disappear and we go to the private sector and we get funding for the campaigns through a C4. This is possible through our own actions, not waiting for the government to do the right thing, but that we do the initiative and we listen to government to make sure that it's not in conflict with what the electeds would like to see happen.
One point to underscore there is, resilience is not a destination. It's a muscle that we build. It's something that we do over and over again. We've heard it through fire science. It's trimming the brush, and that needs to be paid for. It needs to be actively like decided to continue. And so that's why this need for durable funding is required and needs to be assigned kind of ownership and leadership. And so thinking about the creative financing for how to pull that together is one, where leadership is needed, and two, kind of where decisions need to be made and finding opportunities for that to happen at a community level. We talk a lot about hardening the individual home. But at the end of the day, you're really only as safe as your community is. And community level resilience work is something that there's co-beneficiaries. So the entire community, tax revenue, everybody benefits when you invest in resilience, but it is everybody's problem and no one's job. So how do we find the funding together so that we can harden communities at scale and de-risk together?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Earlier this summer, I facilitated a Marin Sonoma Napa dialogue that was led by the community foundations around how do we get to a regional resilience strategy. And that is where we landed the durable funding challenge. It's not a technology problem, it's not a mapping problem, it's where the resources come from. But again, I think that group too is struggling like, okay, but who's going to carry that torch?
And
Right.
and does the public who would be voting on this, do they have the confidence in the way that the durable funding will be initiated and managed by the local governments? So the in San Francisco Bay Area, you have an initiative for coastal resilience,
That's the model they push,
Measure AA.
the Bay measure.
However, in my people's language, the money is bupkis. It's not enough. It's not coming in at a very large level.
But I think one of the challenges comparing flooding to fire, as someone who's a flood scientist, is you can predict pretty well where the floods are going to land or who's impacted by the bay. And it's a lot harder to get that sense of solidarity around the fire hazard because it's so distributed, you know. Um, well, I thought you had an interesting comment when we were prepping Abby about, that there are entities that stand to lose and maybe some that feel like they stand to gain from resiliency, and I'm wondering if you could both flesh that out, maybe starting with you, Avi, a little bit about where are you seeing that? Where are you seeing the entities that have momentum and can support a resiliency initiative, and where do you see the folks that are more gonna be drag on the system?
Yeah, a couple examples I think is in the architecture and building community right now. One thing that surprised me coming out of the fires in Los Angeles is consumer demand. People are asking for a more resilient standard. If you go anywhere else in the country, it's you know you, there's no consumer demand. No architect or builder has even thought about implementing these things because there's really no demand for it. So that's a really good example where, that having the local response adapt to consume it's a fast learning curve. Finding the specs, understanding the material, building new sources, canceling previous orders to do new windows. Those are real tangible things that change and disrupt and cause friction and make it easy to go back to business as usual. So building and kind of architecture design, and there's great innovations in organizations, foothill catalogs, case study 2.0, case study adapt, where they're pulling together and bringing in leaders around this is the North Star as a resilient standard. So let's help build that muscle. So that's one example. The other very clear
And
one.
I'll just add an anecdote to that, like,
Yeah.
one of my very affluent friends who has recently built a home in Los Angeles has none of these resilience things built in, and they just said, "Well, I just thought the architect would take care of that." So to your point, like, does the demand come from the client,
Right.
or does the sector need to, like, also step up and say, "We're in a fire zone,"
Right.
right?
Because if left to own devices, it will be value engineered, like choose the, kind of easiest path. And, the most affordable time to build with resilience is when it's a new or rebuilt. Retrofitting is very expensive. So that's one example. The second one is, relatively clear. The insurance sector has a lot to gain or lose by how they respond to this moment. And the kind of way in which leaving the market is a response to how they do it. We're starting to see insurers crop up and say, we will take resiliency into account into our underwriting. We want to write quality policies for quality homes. And I think you're going to start seeing this thing that should have happened a lot longer ago, which is more innovation and more opportunity and more appetite for this work starting to disrupt insurance in a meaningful way. And so that's another industry and sector that it's taking longer than it should, and it's wildly frustrating when you're navigating the process. But when it comes to, what is the future state of the availability and affordability of insurance, it requires a big kind of market force like that.
So there's a book that was recently published within the last year that's called Abundance. People heard of it? Yes, raise the hands. If you're in Sacramento, you've definitely heard of it because it is all the rage right now. And it's written by Ezra Klein and Garrett Thompson. The thesis is that the Democratic Party is now perceived of the guys that have so much bureaucracy they stop everything and they're not the party of getting stuff done. And that narrative has to be flipped. I think the thesis is absolutely correct. However, in the enthusiasm for the abundance theory, the legislature has done some goofy stuff. So you may not know this, but the budget that was signed in June had a rider on it that said that we will not update our building standards until 2031 so that builders have this absolute assurance that they know the rules of the road and we're not going to tell them what to do. There is an exemption on fire that if the fire marshal makes a recommendation, it'll be considered. That's the one exemption. But I work on extreme heat. So what if there are new wonderful technologies, cool walls, for example? And they exist. Cool walls are great that can cool down a home. And yet we can't put that in a building standard until 2031. It's kind of wild. So the so I think there are winners and losers in this, and we might float some legislation next year, maybe with Senator Ben Allen. We'll see, to see if we can update the building codes for the state when it comes to other climate threats.
Okay, so in our last seconds, you each get that magic pen and you're now running the authority. What are you going to do with your magic pen on your first day?
So, if any of you were at our event, Rebuilding with Resilience in LA, the slide that I think a lot of people took a picture of, 200 million will save 40 billion in future losses. The fire science is there, the technology is there. I think my magic pen is, let's get this money into the hands of homeowners to harden homes, and then we can think about, bond measures, creative financing for how we can do community resilience at scale, and broaden it out. It's my magic pen.
Thank you.
Magic Pen is for everyone to thank Jennifer for putting on such a great
Woo!
event. And that we have the power to get stuff done. We don't have to wait. We are the people we've been waiting for.
Thank you so much, both of you. Really, pleasure.